Trek Profiles Podcast, episode 39, recorded August 2020. This is the Trek Profiles Podcast, where each episode we sit down with a Star Trek fan, we learn their story, and we try to figure out why the show means so much to them, to us, and to all of you. I'm John, your intrepid host of this whole enterprise, and I welcome you to this, the Trek Profiles Podcast, episode 39. If you wish to get in touch with us, you can reach us at feedback@trekprofiles.com or on Facebook or Twitter at TrekProfiles. Warning! As we record this, we are early in Season 1 of Star Trek Lower Decks, so all previous Trek content up to and including that point is fair game and may be discussed during this episode. You have been warned, human. As always, my trusty sidekick and co-host is the boldly brilliant yet barely benevolent M5 Multitronic Unit. Greet our listeners, M5.
M5, standing by.
All right, what messages do we have, M5?
Messages ready.
The Trek Profiles Podcast is an independent Star Trek podcast. If you'd like to support the show, the best way to do that is to subscribe via your preferred podcasting platform. And if you want to tell your Star Trek friends about us, that'd be okay too. There are some lightly edited outtakes and bonus material at the end of this episode. They'll come after the ending audio cards. In these particular ones, my guest and I had an off-the-cuff discussion about spy films, which is something that I don't know a lot about. So enjoy it, or not, as you choose. Let's do Kobayashi Maru feedback from episode 37 with Carrie Purvis. First question was choose your tribble, tiger stripe or leopard spotted or classic solid. Now, Carrie said tiger stripe, but solid was the big winner by 78%. Tiger with 13 and leopard 9. All I have to say about that is wow. The next question was Omega Continuum or Q Continuum. Q was the stunning victor here by 92 to 8%, both on Twitter, and my guest had selected that. I guess you had to have read the books that my guest had recommended for that question to make sense, and I guess we just learned something about the breakdown of my audience. As they say in Star Trek, c'est la vie. Next question. Take a vacation on the moons of Andoria in the fall or Tellar Prime in the spring. Both my guest and all of you on Twitter selected the moons of Andoria, and the Twitter poll came out 77 to 23%. No love for the Tellarites here. Next question. Have a big old slice of cellular peptide cake with mint frosting or ride the train to Vertiform City. Now, I personally would have enjoyed taking a train ride. Who doesn't? But both Carrie and all of you selected the cellular peptide cake with the mint frosting by 64 to 38%. And finally, you've just graduated from Starfleet Academy and you've been offered two options for your very first assignment. Cardassian Border Patrol with Captain Maxwell on the USS Phoenix, or science experiments on board the USS Pegasus with Admiral Pressman. Now, Carrie selected the USS Pegasus with Admiral Pressman, and so did all of you in the Twitter poll by 56 to 44%. As always, ladies and gentlemen, and other species and genders of the Federation, I post my Twitter polls for each and every Kobayashi Maru question on Twitter after each episode drops, where you can have your say on this episode's questions. So go hit me up there if you want to have your say. All right, that's it for messages, communiques, and news. Let's move on. M5, run the intelligence profile, and let's start the show. Roll it. His favorite character is Jean-Luc Picard, and his favorite ship is the Enterprise D, and he's just finished a TOS rewatch. He loves those wild and crazy trill, but Garrick is a big favorite. He's from London, England, Earth in Sector 001. It's Scott Hardy. Welcome, Scott, and thanks for being on the podcast.
Thank you for having me, John. It's an absolute pleasure to be here.
Scott, are you a Star Trek fan?
Yes, sir.
And do you have a recollection of how Star Trek came into your life?
There's two answers to that question. The first one is what I've been told, and the second one is what I actually remember.
All right, let's go with what you remember first.
Okay, so I distinctly remember seeing The Undiscovered Country at the cinema. Now, I can't recall the year that came out, but I was born in 87. So we'll have to do the math on there somewhere. But there is a handheld camcorder recording of me in a little rocker at home with Star Trek playing on my TV. And I'm none the wiser, obviously, because I'm a wee baby. But I was watching Star Trek.
So even unwittingly, as an infant, you were in the club.
I was assimilated from a very young age.
And so you've never had an experience of like being outside the collective and then coming in. You've just sort of grown up in it.
Yeah, it's been with me since I've been able to understand and watch television.
What was the first series that you had a recollection of catching live?
It's got to be the end of The Next Generation. I think that's when I had a somewhat of an idea of what was going on. So I was born in 87 and that's when it launched. So I was about 6 or 7 by the end of the show. Deep Space Nine was launching at the same time. We used to get the VHSs because we'd get the VHS before you would get the TV airing of the episodes.
Really?
In the UK. So I would end up watching 2 episodes at a time every 2 weeks, and then it would play on TV weeks later.
That is amazing. And they were very expensive, if I recollect.
About £15 a pop at the time, which doesn't sound like a lot of money. It's probably about $25 now, but in those days it cost more. Yeah, it's certainly worth a bit more.
So, okay, let's just say $12 US per episode is what you were paying to watch one, somewhere in that ballpark.
That sounds about right. And people don't like the idea of paying, what is it, $10 a month for CBS All Access. Can't figure that out.
If you go for the commercial version, which is cheaper, I think it's $7.99, but then there's the ad-free for $10 or something like that, yeah.
It's a steal of a deal.
Oh, it certainly is to have the whole library. I think it's great, but that's just me. So when you started watching Star Trek towards the end of Next Generation, did you stay watching it all live as it was happening up to the current day, or did you sort of dip out and dip back into it?
I stuck with it until the bitter end.
Until These Are the Voyages then in, what was that, 2004?
2004, sitting... By this point, it was up to date airing on television. Mm-hmm. So I had a particular room in the house that my brothers and I would go to. We would watch it on my mum's bed. And I remember seeing that episode and just being like, oh, this is where we're leaving it. Okay. All right.
And I assume then when the Kelvin movies started, you watched all of those and all the new stuff as well, Discovery and Picard and all of that?
Absolutely. I mean, I was in that sort of dry spell between 2004 and 2009. I think you would have caught me watching fan films most of the time. So even then, I was reading books. So I was doing something Trek.
So normally I don't like to dwell on the stuff that's in the moment, but there is a question I want to ask you, which is that as we record this, Lower Decks is premiering shortly. Are there any plans that you know of to have that show over in the UK? Are you going to be able to get it at all?
There's 2 things up in the air here. Mike McMahon has replied to someone on Twitter saying not to worry about it when it comes to international distribution. So that could mean he has plans, and there are plans in motion, but nothing's been announced. And then, of course, there's always other possibilities, which I'm not a big fan of, but they're always out there.
One thing I am absolutely sure of is that Mike McMahon is the person who knows the least about the international distribution. As the creators, I would imagine that they have no control over that stuff. That's all like up at the CBS level. The show people, I don't think, have any control of it. I could be wrong, but that literally falls under like stuff he's heard around the office, I would guess. I'm not sure though.
I mean, they've got to be quite crazy to not have anything for the rest of the world.
Yeah.
You know, it's a big old planet that we live on, and having just Canada and the United States as the only places to watch Lower Decks doesn't seem right.
So we've talked about the overall arc of Star Trek in your life. I know that you're active on social media and a lot of other places, so you've probably seen examples of some of these fans who really make a break after 2004, and they're like, no, that's it. That's all that Star Trek was. How did you do with that transition into this more modern age of Star Trek?
As in the taking up from the Kelvin verse in 2009, or how did I fill the void in between?
When the Kelvin movie started, and then we have all the stuff that's on CBS All Access and all of that. How are you adjusting to that? What's your general take on it as someone who grew up sort of in the era of Berman Trek?
I have to say, Berman Trek is definitely my crutch. Sometimes, unfortunately, but I go into these shows with an open mind. They're not always for me. Some of the episodes are not always what I look for in Star Trek, but I also struggle with watching the original series sometimes, and that was in the 60s. So that wasn't particularly my Trek either, and it was very successful, and this the reason why we're here.
Now, you mentioned watching the show on your mom's bed in the bedroom with your siblings. Would they consider themselves fans as well, or are you really the flag bearer in that regard in the family?
I can answer that very easily. No, I'm the only one left.
So they don't have if you were to say what are you doing today, Scott? Well, I'm going to talk on the internet with a bunch of Star Trek nerds about why we love Star Trek.
You would hear an exasperated sigh from them, and then they would try and change the subject, I think.
Well, that's something we all deal with here in Star Trek fandom. It's really, there are some people who are in it and they fall out of it, and there are some people who are in it to win it. And we're all, I think some of us, especially the kind of people that listen to this show, in the Star Trek Fan Olympics are all going for the gold medal, I think. And that's A-okay. Scott, one of the questions I always ask people when they want to be on the show, and you were one of those people who asked me to be on, I didn't approach you. So you filled out the contact form on the TrekProfiles website, and it came to me, and I stuck it in the pile. And then when I'm doing my bookings, I always look through that, and I try to make sure I'm getting people of all different kinds of Star Trek fans on the show. And one of the things I noticed in yours is that you had a particular story about some abuse that you suffered as a child and how Star Trek helped you get through that. Why don't you tell us a little bit more about that and how Star Trek helped you?
Sure. Well, I alluded to earlier on, in a sense, that my childhood was in front of Star Trek. I was seen as a camcorder video of me watching Star Trek in a little baby chair. Concurrently, while that was happening, I was living with my mum and my biological father. He was an alcoholic and abusive to my mother, and I lived in that house for the first 5 years of my life. But Star Trek was his show. He used to force myself and my mum to watch it whenever he had the tapes come through, or it was kind of his thing. His house was filled with Star Trek models, all kinds of memorabilia he could get his hands on, and this was the early 90s. There was Playmates toys everywhere around the house that he had bought for himself that I wasn't allowed to play with particularly. Mm-hmm. I eventually got out of that house at about the age of 5. My mum and I got away with my brother, my second brother, and she's remarried since. Everything is fine on that front. I still spoke to my biological father for a few more years after that, till about the age of 10 or 12, and he was watching Star Trek throughout, and it was always something that was associated with him. So my mum would think about Star Trek and think about what she had to go through on a daily basis. And the things that I remember from that period of my life are all tied to Star Trek as well. And a question I used to get a lot from family and people who knew what I'd seen and that my mum had gone through is, why on earth are you watching Star Trek in your own time if that's what you were made to go through? And that's what sort of connects you to your biological father in a sense. And I feel like I took it as my own. There was a point where I could have stopped watching Star Trek altogether. I think most people would have forgiven me for just quitting that show. It is completely linked to that person. But I don't know when the conscious decision was made, but I kept watching it, and now it's my thing. It's nothing to do with him. And so I'm glad that I was able to take that away from the whole experience. And I've taken it as a source of strength since then, I would say. Having gone through all that stuff, and even after the age of 5, there was other stuff that happened in that household. But I kept going with Star Trek, and I now, to this day, see it as a form of confidence building, of strength for me, that I can go through adversity like that and come out of it the other side.
One of the things I've learned by doing this show is that for a pop culture phenomenon that Star Trek is, it really has touched people in some very deep ways. And it's a not uncommon story that I hear that Star Trek got you through some very difficult times in your life. One of the questions I want to ask, Scott, is as we record this in 2020, when you talk to your mom and you bring up Star Trek, do you feel that she identifies it now more with you or with your bio dad?
I'm very happy to say she identifies it with me.
That's wonderful.
I've claimed that back. She's even gone on to watch a little bit herself.
Oh, that's glorious. Now you've got old mom converted.
Yeah, I think it's more the Kelvin stuff she's a fan of, but hey-ho, I'll take it. It's Trek.
Oh, that's quite marvelous. I have a little note here from the M5 that says, I should ask you about the first time you heard the Star Trek Enterprise theme. So I don't know where this is going to lead, but let me just ask the question and we'll go from there.
Picture this, if you will. I've got all of my brothers up to come and watch Star Trek in my mum's room because we couldn't watch it in the front room because it's not parent TV. My parents didn't want to watch it. And they're like, okay, Scott, we'll give this show a try. There's 5 brothers in all in my family. I'm one of 5. Mm-hmm. So I got the other 4 in there with me, and they're like, okay, let's give this thing a try. And you get the opening scene with the Klingon. It's all going well. And then that Russell Watson theme hits. And I could hear the air leaving the room. It was just painful. And from then on, I struggled to watch that theme tune.
Have you come around on it lately?
No.
Or no? Still against it?
I'm a strong believer that theme tunes for Star Trek should be musical scores. Mm-hmm. I don't think that the musical piece they used had any place in that show, particularly. I understand people who are defending it. That's their place and they love it. That's fine. I love Enterprise. I haven't got a problem with the show. But I will automatically skip that every time I listen to it or watch it on Netflix. Oh,
there are some fans out there who are calling you a blasphemer. Time now.
You can find me on Twitter. I will gladly debate it with you. It's not a problem.
You know, I'm always of two minds of it. One is that, you know, as I'm doing an Enterprise watch through right now, is that I love the visuals of the opening. I think it's probably some of the best visuals that Star Trek has ever done. That includes modern Trek. I don't think there's been anything that's been quite as visually beautiful as Enterprise. I think captures sort of the spirit, I think, of Star Trek in a lot of ways. And I love the song, but I don't love the song with the opening theme. I don't like it together. Like I would listen to the song. I like the song. I just don't think it goes there.
I am completely on board with that. I mean, you think of Archer's theme that they use for the end titles. If you put that on the opening credit sequence, it's great. You can watch there's YouTube edits on YouTube of that exact, but you know, that opening sequence with Archer's theme, and it works really well. I don't know.
All right. Well, that's enough of that. I don't want to dwell on that too much. But when it comes to modern Trek, how are you watching it? On a phone, on a tablet, on a big screen? How do you consume it?
Well, we're quite fortunate here because we get Discovery through Netflix. Mm-hmm. So most people have already got Netflix. So that's big TV in my front room. Picard came out on Amazon Prime, which is a bit different. So different services there. But again, I had Amazon Prime. So it was easy. Obviously, with Lower Decks, as we touched on, is going to be a bit trickier. Yeah. We still haven't got Short Trek Season 2 over here either.
Oh, no.
So I've not seen that. Wink, wink.
Oh, you know, I'm sorry.
I'll reiterate. I've not seen that. Wink, wink. Nudge, nudge.
Oh, perfect. Totally understood. So, Scott, are you a collector? Have you been bit by the Star Trek collecting bug and your London abode is bursting at the seams with toys and patches and whatnot? Or are you more discreet and discriminating in your collecting?
I think discreet and discriminating is the exact term I would use. I have one shelf in my entire apartment that has Star Trek memorabilia on it. And it's a weird mix of models. There's a Playmates toy of the Threshold alien. It's kind of all over the place. It's more like sentimental stuff as opposed to a collection. What
makes those particular items sentimental?
Well, there's a framed picture of my Vegas group of friends that a caricature artist drew on the bridge of the Enterprise D. That's there. You've got sort of the Enterprise D, my favorite ship, gracing the shelf. And I won a contest, and the people who ran the contest, the prize was the Playmates figure from Threshold, and they all just signed the cover of it. So the figure is ruined forever now, but it means something to me.
So you mentioned STLV, so you're a convention goer then?
I would say I am a loose convention. Actually, I'll tell you what. It's probably down to the listeners to describe what kind of level I am when it comes to convention going. I don't go to the ones here anymore, even though we have Destination Star Trek most years.
In Birmingham, which is like a train ride from you, right?
We do. It's either in Birmingham or it's in London. And yes, I drive, so it takes 3 hours to get to Birmingham. I could easily get there. But this year would have been my 10th year at STLV. Obviously, we don't know what's happening in December. We'd like to hope it goes ahead. But I just do that every year, basically. That's the extent of my convention going, because that's an expense.
Yeah, and so I assume you've lived in the UK your whole life?
That's right.
So what possessed you to get on that very first plane ride to Las Vegas to go to the convention?
It was a weird escalation, and it's all because of Adam Malin.
Okay, tell me.
For those who don't know, Adam Malin is one of the co-creators of Creation Entertainment. They used to hold conventions here in the UK a long time ago, and the last one they ever ran, which was done in London at the Hilton Hotel on Edgware Road, was my first convention. I didn't really know much about conventions, but I bought a gold ticket because I thought that's what everyone did who was the mega fans. And I got hooked on that sort of feeling of being around other fans. And that was kind of what brought me to it. And then I heard about Las Vegas through Creation, because they did a lot to publicize it. And I literally booked my tickets as soon as the convention was over in January in London here. I booked tickets for August in Vegas.
And that was 10 years ago.
Even longer now. It hasn't been 10 sequential years, unfortunately. It was 2007. I actually went to Vegas when I was 19 years old. So, bit of a bad choice when it comes to some of the things you would do in Vegas. But
yeah. Well, people come here for all sorts of reasons. And, you know, if people want to come for the Star Trek convention, I think it's fantastic. It's wonderful. I have a note here from the M5. He's signaling me that I should ask you about some weird convention interaction that you had with Bobby Clark and Susie Plaxon. So I need to know the deets here, man. So spill it.
Okay. So this is the first convention I spoke about here in London on Edgware Road at the Hilton Hotel. I just got my gold pass. I had walked onto the convention floor, and they had a room for some of the convention signees and the ones you mentioned, along with a few others. I think Don Marshall was in the room as well from the original series. I'd never seen any Star Trek stars in person in my life, and there was 6 of them sat in a room, all facing the door as you would walk in, looking at me as I'd walked in. And so obviously you had to walk up to them and pay for their tickets to get their autographs. And I didn't want to be rude, but the original series wasn't exactly my biggest show. But I thought Bobby Clark, I do like Arena, the Gorn's fun, so I went and got his autograph there, whilst I was getting daggers from Don Marshall in one corner and Susie Plaxon in the other corner, that I didn't pick them first. So I got that photo, and that was my first ever photo op, was with Bobby Clark and the Gorn helmet. It was a great shot. And I thought, okay, I have to get one more at least while I'm in the room. And so I walk over to Susie Plaxon. I'm with my girlfriend at the time. She goes, oh, what have you guys been up to since you got here? And I said, oh, we've been out shopping. You know, I bought her some stuff. You know how it is. And then Susie Plaxon turns around and goes, I buy all my own things. I don't know what you're inferring. And I was like, I didn't mean any of this. Oh, no. And I just sort of froze up and ran out of the room. So that was a good 5 minutes.
Do you think that she was having you on, or do you think that she was being serious?
I like to tell myself she was having me on, because we've spoken about it since and laughed about it. But at the time, I thought she was very serious.
Oh, my goodness. And of course, you freeze up, right? Just like you're in amber. You're like, what happened here, right?
Yeah, so not only is Don Marshall staring at me at my left, I've also insulted Susie Plaxon in front of me. In my first 5 minutes of my first ever Trek convention, I thought, oh, this is it. I'm out. See you later. I just ran.
Scott, have you ever worn a Star Trek uniform?
I have.
Tell me.
I have the Kelvinverse and the original series Kirk uniforms, even though they're not my favorite shows. And I have a Deep Space Nine Science Teal uniform that I've probably worn once. I didn't...
To a convention?
Yeah. I wore the Kirk uniform to the world record attempt at STLV several years ago.
I was at that. I was at one of those. I don't know if it was the same one. Yeah, but I was there. I was wearing a TOS outfit. Absolutely.
Terry Farrell was in the room?
I don't recall. I don't recall. It was a while ago.
Yeah, several years ago now. But that was probably the only time I've ever worn one out in public.
Oh, okay. So you just like to, lounge around the house in them, just put them on, feel good?
Yeah, there's nothing like having a bowl of cereal in Kirk's uniform. I think it's a whole other thing.
Absolutely. Have your Galileos and go ahead and, wear a uniform. Oh, that's fantastic. Right behind me as we record this, you can see in the video that white closet behind me. Yeah. That's all my Star Trek stuff is in there.
I'm amazed you kept it to one closet. Well done.
I do my best. It offends my wife if I try to take over the closet with all my nerdiness. She doesn't dig that. I can have my suits and regular clothes up there, but not the Star Trek stuff. Have you ever tried any other sorts of cosplay besides a uniform for Star Trek?
No. It's never been a big thing for me with conventions. I love looking at everyone's cosplays and I get photos of anyone I see, but it's never been a big pull for me. Was getting dressed up.
Okay. So let's go ahead and talk about some episodes, Scott, if you're game.
Let's do it.
All right. So I think I want to start with one of my personal favorites. The motion picture gets a lot of grief in a lot of quarters for a lot of reasons. But I'm curious as to what in this particular film draws you to it and why it made the list for us to talk about today.
It's a bit of a long story for me with this one. I would have said I didn't like this film at all about 2 years ago. It was literally in my bottom 5, maybe bottom 3 of Star Trek films. And then I saw it on the big screen. And it's as if it flicked a switch and I understood what they were going for. So there's a lot to sort of unpack from that, but just from a visual standpoint, you're looking at the Enterprise in that sort of grand opening shot where we've spent 20 minutes panning around the model of the Enterprise. It's one thing to see it on your little monitor at home, but on a big old screen, you just think, okay, I get what you were going for now. It's not just a bit of fan servicey shots or anything like that. It actually has a meaning in the film. Kirk is looking at his pride and joy.
Right, the thing that he wants.
Exactly. And that, for me, opened it up. And then you've got that massive piece later on where they're flying through V'Ger, and there's those long tracking shots of the teeny little Enterprise inside of V'Ger. Again, watching it at home, you think, oh, this is just a boring shot with people reacting to the view screen. But then you get the idea that they're actually just trying to show scale. And all it took was a cinema visit for me to turn it to probably in my top 5 Star Trek films.
One of the things that always blows my mind about motion picture is that they were really going for sort of a 2001 aesthetic.
Mm-hmm.
And when you look at 2001, man, there's like a 15-minute light show at the end of the film with nothing but lights and an eyeball. And that's it. It cuts back and forth between the actor Keir Dulley's eyeballs and the light show. And there's no talking, there's no nothing, and it's just weird lights and it's trippy, man. And you definitely see the influence for sure.
And now that film is known as one of the prototypes of sci-fi cinema. People look to that film for inspiration when they're making sci-fi films and just films. So I understand why they use that as a sort of template for the motion picture. I think it's great.
One of the things I think that was interesting to me about it is that it just demonstrates in a way that I don't think Star Trek really does a lot of, in that being in space is hard. It should be difficult, right? Even in the future with all the technology and all the things, it shouldn't be. It should be a feat to get in the Enterprise and to go somewhere. And you got a sense of that in motion picture. And I feel like in a lot of other Trek, and this isn't about Berman era, this is even TOS era and even modern Trek, that space feels a little cozy sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
It feels a little too easy. Even in Enterprise, which was supposed to be a more quote unquote, primitive version of, Starfleet and a much less advanced ship. It still feels a little cozy in a lot of ways, not as scary and threatening and as technically demanding as motion picture felt. And as someone who worked in the Navy on a ship, I was on a submarine, I really felt that. So I always connect with that whenever I watch the film, and it really pleases me. So I was very curious to ask you about that. Let's move on and talk about some other episodes then. Let's talk about the Ensigns of Command, certainly a favorite of mine, mostly because it introduces one of the most bizarro aliens that I really enjoyed, the Shellyak Corporate, quite legalistic and crazy. It's mostly a Data episode, of course, where he has to go down to the planet, convince these people to evacuate because the Shellyak are coming. And they're going to basically nuke and pave the planet and put their own people down there. Or I don't know what they would call themselves, but they're going to invest. They're going to put more Shellyak on the planet. and they want those humans out of there. And if they're not out of there, they're going to force them out of there, and it's not going to be so good for them. So certainly a very interesting Data episode. There's sort of a romantic angle on it as well. What about this particular episode is special or meaningful to you, Scott?
For me, it's more of the B story with Picard back on the ship, where he's trying to stall for time to give Data time to try and convince the colonists on the planet. Instead of the brash sort of Kirk approach where he would maybe bluster in and convince them somehow that his is the right way and to give him time, Picard and Troy go and look through the treaty between the Sheliak and the Federation and eventually find a clause to allow them to get more time. He completely manages the tension in the situation. He resolves it without escalation. And that is something that I aspire to whenever I deal with confrontation myself.
Is that something that you normally deal with in your life?
Let's just say in my career, it involves a lot of de-escalation.
Ah, okay, very good. So it's something that you've taken from Star Trek, and it's actually something that you apply in your own life.
Jean-Luc becomes one of my Star Trek idols, I would say. The way he operates and manages situations is something I aspire to.
So let's talk about that for a second. So having seen the Picard show, how have your feelings about Picard changed, if at all, based on what you knew from Berman era and now going into the Picard show? Has your feelings about the character of Picard improved, gotten worse, or stayed about the same, or what?
There's been some choices with the character that I'm not sure I can understand at this point. I've gone back and watched Picard 2 times now. And if you think about the first episode, Remembrance, there's that moment in the speech when he's talking to the reporter and he clarifies and he goes, "No, lives." That's a really poignant moment. That feels like Picard to me. But then there's moments where he's playing around with an eye patch and putting on accents. And for me, it just didn't feel more as Picard as my Picard. But I don't know what that means. What's my Picard? Well,
I think it's the version of the character that we hold in our heads and in our hearts, right? And that's not just in Star Trek. That's in a lot of things. We have this version of how you feel about things, and then there's often the reality, which can certainly be different. I remembered I got a piece of advice once when I was in college from a professor, and he said, never try to meet your heroes because you're guaranteed to be disappointed. And I feel like there's a little bit of that going on in that, when you have Picard in Berman era, he really is the captain, being captainly. And in Picard, that's a past part of his life. And he's not trying to be the captain. He's just trying to be whatever he is. And he's not putting on that sort of that mantle of leadership is not something that he's walking around with on his vineyard, right? Especially like the Momulan, she would not be putting up with any of that. Stop your captaining and go, wash your hands or whatever. They wouldn't put up with any of that guff, I don't think.
Well, to be fair, he's also taken 20 odd years off. He's not been a captain for a long period of time. He hasn't had to flex that muscle. So that I can understand that at least the first season of Picard, he's a bit less captainly.
Absolutely.
He's not even technically a captain.
Exactly. And I think that's okay, right? And so you see this character at a different stage in his life, and of course he's going to be different. At least that's how I made sense of it. And it struck me as very human, very, very true, with a capital T. But that was just my take. I'm always curious to see what people think when they sort of revisit these characters and change them around. Now, speaking of revisiting characters, one of the things that was really interesting in Deep Space Nine is when they decided to bring Worf over from the Enterprise, and he shows up in The Way of the Warrior, but then like he magically transports back to be in the films. I don't really understand what's happening there, but it's neither here nor there. But in The Way of the Warrior, he shows up on Deep Space Nine, and this was an episode that you particularly felt was worthy of our attention. So I'm curious, Scott, as to what's going on here with Way of the Warrior and why this is on the list.
Sure. To give you a bit of an answer, I probably need to give you a bit of a preface as to why.
Let's do it.
The Next Generation was the show I grew up on, as I've mentioned earlier. It was the first show, came out when I was born. You could say I was born into the show. I would probably say it's not my favorite Star Trek as an adult. As a kid, it was my favorite show. As an adult going back and rewatching Star Trek, I would say Deep Space Nine has the edge, ever so slightly. Now, looking at Deep Space Nine as a whole, you have the first couple of seasons that I love, as I love all of Star Trek, but once you hit Way of the Warrior, it's like they've just put the pedal down and they're pushing, the accelerator's going up now, things are starting to click. Worf turning up on the station, it's like it all just now works all of a sudden. Not to say that they didn't have some great episodes in the previous seasons, but as soon as Worf turns up, I just feel like it just sort of completes the show, and they found that missing piece that maybe they didn't have at the start. And not to mention, it's a rip-roaring episode with great action sequences, great acting. I'm a big Garak fan, as you mentioned earlier on, and it's a big Garak episode. That little fight scene in the corridor with Descartes when they're shooting all the Klingons and they're just throwing barbs at each other the whole way through. It's very much how I deal with that sort of situation. Lots of sarcasm.
That sounds very British too, Scott, I must say. It's right there in the stereotype. So good on you for, just living up to the expectation.
I can only try.
All right, well, let's talk about a little bit more of TNG. It seems like we're on a TNG kick, and I'm all right with that. So let's talk about Best of Both Worlds. Now, this one certainly comes up a lot as sort of the best of Star Trek episodes that mean a lot to people. If you were to pick like the one or two things that really stand out for you in Best of Both Worlds, what would those things be?
I'll lean back on myself watching it as a kid, because this is why it's up on there on the list for me. Again, watching it now as a piece of work with the two parts, I think the second part's a lot weaker than the first, and they've obviously written themselves into a bit of a corner and try and get themselves out of it in the second part to varying success. But good grief. Seeing Riker step up, take charge, Picard getting taken away, and that sort of fight to get him back, it's just great storytelling. And that bit at the end where Riker's just pause, fire. And it's like perfect television. You could show anyone that episode, I think non-Trek fans, and they would probably be quite riveted by the end of it and want to see what happens in part 2. I wouldn't show them it because I didn't want to disappoint them, but I'll leave them hanging.
One of the parts of that episode that never really gets resolved for me, which is one of the most interesting parts of the episode, in my opinion, is Commander Shelby. I want to know where she is and what she's doing, because I thought she was a firecracker and I was totally subscribed to her. And I would have loved to have, and this is not in any way a negative thing about the Riker character, but I just would have loved to have seen the adventures of Captain Picard and First Officer Shelby. I just felt like that would have been a show I would have wanted to watch, because she was such a firecracker that seeing her deal with him. And I think we're getting a little bit of that in Picard, a little bit. But I think that the Raffi character is a little bit more matured and a little bit more mellow than I think Shelby was. I mean, Shelby really was like, just full of that vim and vigor that I thought was really good contrast. And I don't mean to rewrite the show, but I just would have loved to have seen some of their adventures. I just felt like that was a screw that was unturned.
It's not very often on TV shows where they come out with a character for one episode and they are fully fleshed out and you want to know more about them, especially with the sort of episodes of the week like Next Generation used to do, or Villain of the Week, that sort of setup. Non-serialized, I suppose, is the phrase. But, Elizabeth Shelby, she turns up and you just, you hate her, but you also want to see more of her. And then she just vanishes for the rest of, Trekdom.
Yeah.
That's it. I mean, unless you're a big fan of the books or anything like that, where there's obviously more of a follow-up, but obviously not canon. So what's she doing now?
I rank that as one of my top 2 Star Trek mysteries. Number 1 is Where is Mistral and whatever happened to him from Carbon Creek. And the second one is that, which is where's Shelby at and what's she doing? Because I'm sure she's like a fleet admiral, or she's kicking butt and taking names somewhere, I don't know where, but I'm sure she had a bright future. So I look forward to finding out, maybe in season 2 of Picard. Who knows? Okay, let's talk about one of those time loop episodes, which Star Trek seems to do quite a bit of from time to time. And even in New Trek, they're still doing them. It's like a really good cheeseburger. You can eat it again and again, and every time it's delicious. But the particular version of this hamburger that you've selected, or cheeseburger, I should say, is Cause and Effect, where we get the wonderful Bozeman showing up and the repeated destruction of both ships, the Enterprise and the Bozeman, with the time loop and Data trying to figure it all out. What an amazing episode for many reasons, but I want to know from you, what is the reason that this episode came to the top of the list for you?
Well, I mean, I feel like we all feel like we're in cause and effect right now with the lockdowns, and some people getting out, some people not. Every day starts to feel kind of the same. So I've just been watching that every day on a loop, basically, as part of my daily loop routine.
It's sort of like that movie Groundhog Day, where like everything's the same, just you keep going through it again and again, and you keep running into the same stuff, right? So you keep watching that episode. So you feel it's like a parallel between your current, as we record this, life and Star Trek. Is that right? So if we had been recording this in January of 2020, it wouldn't have made the list because COVID hadn't have happened. Is that what you're trying to tell me, Scott?
I'd say it probably bumped it up the list a little bit. It feels quite apt right now. But no, it's still one of the best episodes of Next Generation by far. Great little story, and another one of those self-contained episodes that you could just put in front of someone and they would love it. They don't have to know who anyone is, and they would just have a great time for 42 minutes.
Well, I don't know how I feel about that, because my wife is one of those people that whenever she sees an actor that she knows, she always is like, oh, I don't like this because I didn't like the other thing that he was in, or I like the thing that he was in, or I read something about that actor that I don't like, therefore I don't like the show. She does that to me all the time.
You shouldn't judge Brent Spiner by Independence Day 2. That's not fair.
Well, you seem to like these time loop episodes or time skip episodes, because another one that you wanted to talk about was yesterday's Enterprise. So here we certainly have an amazing episode with the return of Tasha Yar. We have a lot of Guinan stuff in it. We get this alternate sort of not quite mirror universe, but sort of dark universe version of the Federation. So what's going on here with yesterday's Enterprise? Why is it something that's special to you?
Yesterday's Enterprise falls into the category of what I'd say is my comfort food episodes. They're episodes of Star Trek I can go back to and watch a billion times over. I even have a t-shirt that has the Let's Hope History Never Forgets the name Enterprise written on the front, and that's one of my nice t-shirts I wear out. Overall, I would just say it does a lot with characters. It actually spends time with the characters, and it lends a bit to Tasha Yar as well. I think she really got shortchanged in the first season. I know obviously what was going on behind the scenes was unfortunate, and I can understand why she left the show, but it does so much to make it seem a bit more relevant, to give her death a bit more meaning. And also it's a kick-ass story, and you get to see the Enterprise C and have a little fight in space with the Klingons. What more do you want?
Romulans, wasn't it?
Oh, I'm so bad at that. Jeez.
No, the whole point was they fought the Romulans, and then the Klingons knew that they had fought the Romulans, and that's what turns the Klingons around. Oh my God.
Right? So they're both there. So there's Klingons in the episode, and there's Romulans through the portal. There we go.
Yes.
That's it. Yeah. So I wasn't going crazy. There was Klingons. Okay. Sorry, this lockdown of day in, day out is just driving me slightly mad. Sorry about that.
That's A-okay. I think we're all dealing with that a little bit, Scott. It's just part of life in the middle of 2020 that we're all dealing with. But, the other thing, too, is that we should be dealing with the eugenics wars and the aftermath of that, right? And Khan would be flying off in his DY-100 class sleeper ship right about now, or maybe that was in the 90s, I forget. And one of the other episodes that you wanted to talk about was Wrath of Khan. Now, some people have said that it's not really that great of an episode of Star Trek, but it's the greatest... It's the greatest film that Star Trek ever made, but it doesn't necessarily have a lot of Star Trek in it, which is one of the criticisms that I've heard. But other people say, no, it's absolutely one of the best of all Star Trek. So where do you come down on this dilemma?
I would say it's probably not one of the best Star Trek films for its Star Trekness. I'll say that in air quotes, Star Trekness. But it's a great film. It's a great submarine military style film. You served in the military and you were in a submarine. So you probably have some sort of experience. But it has that sort of tension of submarine dramas around the time. Did a lot of films around the Cold War, that sort of style. It just happens to have our favorite characters going around at the same time. You've got Kirk dealing with age. Everyone's actually got a role in the film, even from Chekhov down. The whole of the TOS crew actually do something important in a film, which some of the other films can't say that. Some of the original series can't say that.
Even little Peter Preston in the extended version.
Yeah, very true. Some people have never seen that bit, so they don't even know. It's hard to get now because it's not on the Blu-ray.
There is a director's... Well, I don't know, it might not be in the UK, but in the US, there is a director's extended cut that does have all the Peter Preston stuff in it.
Oh, really? A Blu-ray version?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure. I believe I have it. We can double check on this, and I'll put a link to it in the show notes for the episode just to clarify. But I'm pretty sure that it is available, at least here in the United States.
I'm going to have to go try and find that now. That's my extensive Blu-ray collection.
Fantastic. Are they doing all that region-locked stuff with Blu-rays?
Yes.
Oh, terrible. Terrible.
It seems to be more older films. Newer films seem to be able to go anywhere, but anything made pre-90 seems to have all these region locks and stuff. I don't know why they do it. Probably just to get more money out of us, but hey-ho.
Very strange. So let's take a different look at Picard. You've really gone heavy on TNG here, Scott. You've got Cupid, which is the one, of course, with a little bit of Vosh in it. We've got Q, of course, you can tell by the title. And we've got the Robin Hood sort of sets that we go into. So we tell this Robin Hood story in Star Trek. I'm really curious as to how this episode ended up on the list. I know I say that a lot. But this one, I really was amazed. Not to say it's a bad episode, but it's not an episode I often see people wanting to talk about. So tell me what's going on with this one.
This is a bit of a strange one. The reason why I picked it as one of my top episodes is because it's one of the only VHSs as a kid I owned. So I had this VHS which has Cupid and the Nth Degree, which is the episode right before it, the Barclay episode where he turns into a brainiac.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm pretty sure I rinsed that tape. I may well have burnt out the middle of it from watching it so many times because I didn't have many tapes as a kid in my own collection, and I just had that one. And so I went back to it so many times, I'm pretty sure I could do it back to front. And let's not forget, I'm a Brit, and it spends most of its time going through, the old Friar Tuck story and Robin Hood, all that sort of stuff. So it feels like home for me. It feels like Star Trek at home. You'll often find me down the forest chasing people with a bow and arrow, but that was a story for another day.
How far is Sherwood Forest from London, Scott? Do we need to figure this out?
It's a bit of a drive, but let's say I have made that drive before.
Very good, very good, very good. So let's talk about something a little different. Let's talk about some Voyager, which I'm pleased to see on the list. I recently completed a Voyager watch through and really grew to like the show and really enjoyed it quite a bit, more than I was expecting to, because I just heard in the fandom so many negative things about it. But when I actually sat down and watched it, I really enjoyed it. In fact, I prefer it to some of the other series that we could talk about. So you picked the Year of Hell, or as I like to call it, the Year of Heck. Here we have Anarax, the Krenim, who decides to change history and alter the timeline with this sort of mega project of traveling around on his ship. You know, a sparkling performance on all accounts, and certainly an interesting villain in that he is really just trying to be happy. And he's really just trying to have his wife and kid back. I mean, really, really tragic in a lot of ways, which is, I think, the hallmark of a good villain. So what is it about this episode that touches you?
Year of Hell is everything that Voyager should have been. And I say that with a lot of love for Voyager as well. It's probably not my top... it's definitely not my top 2 Star Treks, but it's something I do go back to and watch from time to time. But I feel like Voyager could have played with the stakes a lot more. They had X amount of equipment to get to a destination, and it's hard to make a lot of that stuff up. And Year of Hell really drove it home. It really drove it home that there are consequences to actions. Mm-hmm. So the ship gets damaged, they're not just going to repair it with a flick of a switch. Next episode, you're all fine. It hangs on. And that's something I think Voyager should have probably tackled a lot more as a run of the show. But obviously, television at that point didn't really want much serialization, especially after Deep Space Nine. But I just feel that was exactly what Voyager should have been. It should have been consequences to actions. And up until that bit at the end where they just reset everything, and that still irks me. But and she's flying into the Krenim ship and like, hell yeah. And then obviously reset button. But that's everything Voyager should have been.
One of the episodes that often gets bandied about on the internets by fans, I think when they just like to stir up trouble, is Tuvix. And not that it's on the list, but given this discussion that you're talking about of having consequences, I feel like the episode as it is would have been I think it would have put aside a lot of controversy if we'd just gotten like Captain Janeway for 3 episodes, like after that, just sitting in her dark cabin, like slamming a shot of whiskey or something, dealing with the consequences of that. Because the way that it sort of ended was just a little too trite. And a little just too buttoned up at the end. And regardless of how you feel about the ethics, I always feel like the weight of that resting on someone really merited a much richer meal than what we got, which was pressing the reset button at the end of the episode. And I feel like that's one of the reasons the episode is still controversial, is that we never got to see sort of a resolution of the emotional weight of it. How would you respond to that?
Oh, sorry. I agree entirely to that point. I'm not going to wade into the Tuvix debate. I know there's different camps on Twitter, but everyone has their opinion on what should have been done. But you look at, I think it's the opening of season 5 or season 6 of Voyager. I'm not very good with episode titles, but there's where they're flying through the sort of dark area of space.
The Void.
The Void. And Janeway spends most of the episode kind of upset because she's let the crew down and sort of moping around for a bit. That sort of reaction should have been what we saw. And there's lots of decisions that they made during Voyager that really should have had more of a consequence on the ship. They're blowing up shuttlecraft, they're firing torpedoes. They only had, I think on the first episode, they said they had like 70 odd torpedoes. And then there's a great YouTube video of someone actually going through and counting all the torpedoes that are fired in Voyager. And it far exceeds that count. Well, that's fine. It's television. That's what happens. But just stuff like that I wish had stuck around, because there should have been consequences to actions. And Tuvix is a great example of where, even if we had Tuvix around for 3 episodes, as Janeway sort of debated back and forth as to what she was going to do about it and then acted on it or something like that. But again, as you say, it was 1 in, 1 out. Next week, everyone's happy and shaking hands.
Yeah, even if Janeway was unaffected by it, I feel absolutely convinced that there would be some members of the crew who would be second-guessing that decision. Well, let me put that the most polite way I can, right? Because you're like, oh, the captain's willing to kill people who are under her command, right? If she feels it's necessary, right? And like I'm talking like not order them to do something risky. I'm talking straight up kill them. And that was like, whoa. So I feel like that would be worthy of discussion. Like you could have had a whole episode just about that, like a lower decks version of that on Voyager would have been great. But, you know, that's if wishes were horses, as they say. So let's talk about another time travel movie, Scott. I'm detecting a theme here. I don't know what's going on, but here we have.
Are we stuck in a loop? Are we
stuck in a loop? Because we're going to revisit again. This time it's First Contact. So what's going on with this one?
First Contact is my guilty pleasure Star Trek film. I watched it many, many times as a kid. I even saw it in the cinema when I shouldn't have been able to have seen it in the cinema at that age. And I have this thing where I have watched all of Star Trek as a kid, as we mentioned before. And I liked certain episodes, but I realized as an adult, the stuff I liked as a kid is completely different. And a lot of it hasn't held up on second watch. And that's how I've sort of moved from Next Generation to Deep Space Nine as an adult. But First Contact has stayed in the game. I think as a film, it's definitely got its flaws. But it is just a pure popcorn action film. The battle scenes at the start, it's a guilty pleasure, I have to say. Alice Krieger chewing up the screen as the Borg Queen. And it's a good use of the emotion chip. You don't see that get used very, very well after that, unfortunately. Mm-hmm. And it actually made the Borg scary. And I like a bit of horror films amongst other types of films. And actually, there was a fear factor to it, especially watching it as a young guy. I still get visions of Borg from time to time. It was had that much of an impact on my psyche. Absolutely,
the Borg were just terrifying, and I think there's a whole theory of the Borg as horror that you can plumb, and they're really just something else in that episode. I think Voyager lessened that a little bit, but certainly in First Contact, it was really just stellar. So, all right, let's turn to Deep Space Nine. Let's get away from all the TNG stuff and the time loop stuff. Let's talk about A Call to Arms, Season 5, Episode 26. Here's the one where Gul Dukat launches a massive attack on the station. We've got a lot of Rom and Lita stuff. We've got all kinds of crazy things happening. It's our finale at the end of Season 5. What in particular in this episode stood out to you, Scott?
John, I wish I could give you some deep philosophical answer as to why I like this episode and really sort of peel the layers of the onion of the episode. But man, has this got some killer fight scenes. You know, you've never seen fleet scenes on this sort of scale until this point in Star Trek. And you've seen all these ships on the screen. And it's just, especially as a young kid watching it, I don't know, it must have been 96, 97. So I would have been about 10. That's just kick ass.
Very good. Very good then. So again, it's another cheeseburger episode, right? You never get tired of them. They're always, if as long as it's decently made, it's delicious.
If there's anything that we need right now, it's a little bit of joy.
Scott, we've talked about a lot of the episodes and movies that have really touched you. We've talked about your growing up, dealing with an abusive dad and sort of claiming Star Trek for your own. But yet here you are, full-grown man, and you're spending your time today talking with me on the internet about why you love Star Trek so much. So let me just put the question to you directly. Why do you love Star Trek?
It's such a multi-layered question that I maybe could answer in one word, or I could spend a day trying to decipher it for you. I think for me, it's just about hope. I think that's the word. There's episodes of Star Trek that are funny. There's episodes of Star Trek that are super serious. But at the end of the day, they're always trying to be something better than themselves. I don't think you could really name an episode of Star Trek where they're not striving to be good. And I think that's what I've always gravitated towards, is even in the depths of despair, you should try and be the best version of you that you can be. And that's what Star Trek is to me.
Well, Scott, I've enjoyed our conversation, but the M5 has put up an alert, and it's telling me that it is now time for the Kobayashi Maru.
Oh boy.
The Kobayashi Maru is a challenging and difficult test, cunningly prepared by the M5. Should you not only survive the test, but pass it as well, the M5 will award you an honorary Star Trek title on behalf of our podcast. Are you ready to face the Kobayashi Maru, Scott?
Absolutely.
M5, load the Kobayashi Maru simulation and prepare to record Scott's responses.
Simulation ready.
Question 1. What's it made out of? Duranium or terminium?
Duranium.
Question 2. Time to be a tourist. Do you want to visit the Wall of Heroes on Andoria or take a tour of the Vulcan Science Academy?
The Wall of Heroes, I would say.
Question 3. Hang out in Quarks or hang out in 10 Forward?
Quarks.
Question 4. You are on the Enterprise D and there is an emergency saucer separation. Do I find you on the saucer section or the drive section?
Saucer section. I'm where the action is.
Question 5. You are a new Starfleet engineer. Choose your first assignment. Impulse engine operations or transporter repair?
Impulse engine operations.
Simulation complete. M5, please compute the results and tell us if our guest has passed the Kobayashi Maru.
Analyzing results.
Very well done. Now, why'd you pick impulse engines over transporter repair? You don't want to be there with O'Brien or something?
He creeps me out. I don't know. Standing in that room by yourself all day, or with O'Brien just standing there waiting for something to happen. Not for me. I want to be running around the ship doing stuff. Active.
Yeah, it's always weird when they walk in the transporter room. He's just sort of standing there poking at the panel. You know, he doesn't even have a chair to sit on. It seems very lonely.
Does he get a lunch break? That's what I worry about. Like, he's just there all day.
I know, he's just there in that room. It seems like incredibly boring. I don't know. You don't get to have other people around, and if there are people around, they're just coming or going, but no one's there. I don't know. I wouldn't like it. I like to talk to people, which is why I do a podcast. So
yeah, it feels like he got demoted when you look at like his first few episodes where he's on the bridge.
Yeah, right. And he used to be on the bridge, used to be a bridge officer, and then he gets down into the transporter. But maybe it's like what Uhura said in Star Trek 3 that, you know, solitude appeals to her, right? So there you go. Could
be. She's not shoved anyone into the cupboard this time, though, so that's the main thing.
Exactly, right. What was the guy's name? Mr. Action? She called him something, right? Yeah, Mr.
It was Mr. Something. It was sarcastic.
We'll have to look that
something
up.
Like that.
We'll have to look that up. So I'm sure people on Twitter will correct us. Okay, and now the M5, who has analyzed your answer, Scott, will award you an honorary Star Trek title on behalf of our podcast. M5, what title shall we award our guest?
Scott Hardy is awarded the title of Third Assistant Groundskeeper for Starfleet Academy.
So there you go.
I couldn't be prouder to receive this title.
Scott, tell people how they can get in touch with you if they want to continue the Star Trek conversation.
Okay, so there's two ways. If you like the sound of my voice, then you can find me on my podcast, and that's Spy Hards. It's a weekly podcast where we tackle spy movies and try to figure out which ones make our knock list, which is basically a list of the best spy movies of all time. So yeah, if you don't mind the sound of my voice, you can find me at Spyhards. That's SPYHARDS on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Now, if you don't like the sound of my voice, you can also find me on my personal accounts at Tiberius Hardy. That's HARDY, and Tiberius, how you would spell it.
Wonderful. Scott, thank you so much for being part of Trek Profiles.
Thank you for having me.
Here ends this installment of the Trek Profiles podcast. And before we offer a Trek quote to close this episode, I'd like to remind you that you may send us your friendly suggestions, your vicious screeds about Tuvix, or your selfie videos of yourself twerking to the Star Trek Enterprise theme, or any other such stunts to feedback@trekprofiles.com or on Facebook or Twitter @TrekProfiles. Anything you send us may be used in the show, or it may be erased from time by a Krenim temporal death ray. This week, I leave you with a quote from Quark, who in the episode The Way of the Warrior said, quote, "The Klingons? First it was the Cardassians, then it was the Dominion, now it's the Klingons. How's a Ferengi supposed to make an honest living in a place like this?" Close quote. Thanks for listening, and live long and prosper.
This handcrafted podcast is brought to you by Stars and Sky Media Lab. It's cosmic.
I feel like we need to interrogate this a little bit since you brought it up. So I have to ask you some questions now, because I'm not a spy guy, a spy movie guy. So what's probably at the top of your list when it comes to spy films right now, today, as we record this? Not to say it can't change, but right now.
I would probably have to go with North by Northwest by Alfred Hitchcock.
Okay.
It's a film I recently rewatched for the podcast, and there's an episode we'll have coming out about it. And I'm not going to give away my feelings of whether it makes the list or not, but let's just say I'm a big fan.
Okay. And James Bond, yay or nay?
Absolutely yay. I mean, I'm British. I'm probably going to have a martini after this.
Fantastic. I'm having a martini right now, and it's only 10 o'clock in the morning here. I'm kidding. So who's your favorite Bond?
For me, it has to be Sean Connery.
That's great.
Bit of a controversial answer these days. A lot of people are not a big Sean Connery fan anymore, but he is, for me, the embodiment of a mix between the action hero Daniel Craig and the super camp of Roger Moore.
You know, it's funny because as we record this right now, I'm watching Knives Out on Amazon Prime. I don't know if you've seen it.
Great film. Great film.
But I've never actually seen any James Bond films, but I've never watched one. But and it's not because I'm anti James Bond or anything. It's just never come up. But it's really he takes me out of it for some reason, and I realize that's for some reason I watch it. He's got that sort of Southern accent, and it's Daniel Craig who played James Bond, and I'm watching, and I'm like, I don't know if I like this. I don't know.
That accent choice is strange, I have to admit. When I saw that film, I was like, this is not what he sounds like.
I mean, he's doing a great job with the accent. It's, it's not his work on it is very good, but there's just something about it that I find off-putting and weird, and it just takes me out of it every time he's on screen, which in the movie is a lot. So I was like, I don't know how I feel. I haven't finished it yet, so I'm only about halfway through it. It's I watch it on my little lunch break when I get up from my computer and go in the other room and have lunch for 10 minutes. I watch it, and it's probably some sort of movie sin to admit that, but that's how I'm watching it.
Hey, as long as you're watching the film, I'm all for it. But if you would allow me, I will recommend you a James Bond film.
Oh, you're going to give me one.
And if you want to pick it up, I'll give you one.
And before you say whatever you're going to say, I'm just going to say, I am not someone who dislikes old films. So I would encourage you that if you're going to recommend one film, and I'm not even saying I'm going to watch it, but give equal weight to old and new. I don't need like spectacle to make me feel like, I don't need that. I'm okay with it. So I'm like a TOS guy for Star Trek, to give you an example. So go ahead and hit me.
I would have usually gone for an older film, but I think personally the film that defines Bond the most is Daniel Craig's Casino Royale.
So that's the one Bond film I should watch.
I would say watch that film, and if you don't like it, you won't like any other Bond, I would say, because it has a mix of everything that came before and a mix of everything that will come afterwards. And not only that, it's probably one of the best Bond films they've ever made overall.
Okay.
So if you've never watched a Bond film all the way through, I'd say give Casino Royale a real go, sit in the theater one evening, give yourself a nice dark room to watch it in and really focus on the film.
I've never seen, it's not all the way through, I've never seen any James Bond at all, period. Like, except for like fleeting stuff and like other, like where they show a clip of something on a show, but I've never actually like pressed play on a Bond, if that's what you're asking me. Okay, so what is the most overrated Bond film? We didn't plan any of this, by the way, listeners. This is all just like in the moment, so I'm putting them.
No. I'm quite enjoying it because it's a good question to be asked. I would say the most overrated Bond film is probably Skyfall.
Okay, and why is that one overrated?
Well, it was the 25th official Bond film. It was done for the anniversary, the 50th anniversary. No, I take it back. It was the 23rd. It's 25 at that point, non-official. Anyway, so it was one of the best box offices for the film, even adjusted for inflation, looking backwards.
Mm-hmm.
But in terms of content of a Bond film, it has no real spy drama going on. It's more of a character story about Bond, which is fine, but that's not what James Bond films are. And people went crazy about the film when it came out. And I remember going to the theater and just thinking, it's okay. So
you are counter-revolutionary in your feelings about that particular film, going against the crowd.
Yeah, a little bit. I mean, I'm not anti-Daniel Craig. I like my action Bond films. They're fine. But Skyfall for me is... people throw praise over it, and I just think it's passable at best. There's much better Sean Connery or Roger Moore films you could go back and watch.
All right, so you've mentioned North by Northwest. Give me some non-James Bond films you'd recommend in the spy genre.
Okay. Here's a fun one we covered recently. Did you know that Men in Black was a spy film?
I guess I'm not familiar with what the parameters are to be counted as a spy film, but I'm guessing you're going to tell me that it matches those.
It fits the parameters, let's put it that way. So that's quite an interesting one. Another what's the best way of looking at it? Here's a good one, actually. Here's a good one for you. I would say The Man from U.N.C.L.E.
Oh, a classic.
So there's the classic 60s TV show, which it actually still holds up now, and it actually is a nice companion piece to sort of Batman and the original series from the 60s. They all kind of go together quite well. The theme was also written by Jerry Goldsmith, so there's a nice little connection there. There's quite a few Star Trek actors that have appeared in it. Even William Shatner and Leonard Nimoy were in an episode together before they were in Star Trek on The Man from U.N.C.L.E.
I did not know that. I will have to check that out.
Yeah. I think Leonard Nimoy is playing a villain, and Bill Shatner is sort of a passerby, gets pulled into the story. But the 2015 remake film with Henry Cavill and Armie Hammer, so it's a very, very enjoyable hour and 50 minutes of spy drama with a lot of quips. If you like your irreverent, funny films with a bit of action going on, it's a nice little popcorn flick I'd recommend to anyone.
All right, wonderful. So we've got some spy film picks from you today. I will definitely be putting all of this in the bonus material so people can enjoy this conversation if they want. I think that's great.
If you don't like my rankings of Bond films, you know where you can find me, at SpyHards on all of your in social media.
Oh, so you're challenging all comers on this. If they disagree, you want to have at it.
Yeah. If you disagree, come and tell me why I'm wrong, and I will tell you why you're wrong.
All right. Well, then I think we're going to leave it there, Scott. All right. Very good.